Hi lads, and welcome back to War Thunder with Koala, and welcome to some MiG-21 best gameplay. Specifically, this is the new East German model, and in today's video we are not only taking a look at a jet that the meta has very much changed around, but we are also playing it completely stock. Oh boy. But before we get started with today's video, I do want to let you know that I am back. I've been on a hiatus of sorts over the last 3 weeks, firstly building and setting up a new PC, which we are now on. I had some real strangeness, thought I'd lost some files and everything, but this thing is an absolute beast. Secondly, recovering from an illness, and thirdly, a few other personal things which we can talk about at another time. So in this video, there is so much we could talk about. Jet gameplay at top tier is an incredibly exciting place right now, and going forward, it's only going to get even more insane. But rather than touch on the topic of how new missiles and new radars have changed the meta of the game and how to play around them, which new jets are king, which old ones have been pushed aside, and a real how-to on playing the MiG-21 itself. Instead, I wanted to have a look at this game, which was maybe not a great match, but a good example of what you can expect from a good stock match. We can talk about how to play when you're stock, what the grinding process looks like, and I do want to discuss the stock aircraft at top tier in general. Now, the stock grind in top tier jets has gotten really nasty, because not only is more and more of your aircraft's performance and the reason it's at the battle rating that it is in the first place tied up in your modules, but the game has progressed away from a meta that lends itself to the stock grinding process. What do I mean by this? Well, when you get your aircraft, it's obviously at its absolute worst, and you are also at your absolute worst in it because you haven't had any experience with that particular jet before, sans playing these Soviet versions of these East German planes. To account for that, you get free repairs, which means you have a safety net, and what this allows you to do is to be very aggressive. This is something I think a lot of players are a wee bit hesitant to do, but the top players have been suggesting for years. You want to be pushing your aircraft past its limits when you're stock, finding out what is going to get it killed, and then work back from there, finding out exactly where its limits are. At top tier though, it's all long-range missile combat. Your R-24s, AIM-7s and Skyflash, and even AIM-9Gs and Js, these are going to define how every aircraft needs to be played. Whether you have these weapon systems or not, they will define what you can do and what you can't. But that doesn't mean that there aren't a few ground pounders, particularly on the Russian team. So what we've done here is exactly that, gone hyper-aggressive, and while the mainline fighters on the teams are climbing to get the best start to their engagements, we've already swooped in, waited for an Su-17 to be distracted bombing ground vehicles, and take him out with an R3S. Quick, simple, Interceptor 101. Take the opportunity to engage several AI Yak-38s, which I suspect is going to be somewhat controversial, but to go through my thought process here, the MiG-21 BIS, and in fact the MiG-23s as well, when stock, are not very effective gunfighters. The 23mm, while personally I actually quite like it on the MiG-21 PFM at 9.3, and even the new SPSK, the German Premium at 10.0, I am definitely the exception here, and at top tier, even I am going to struggle, especially when it's the only weapon. R3Ss against another fighter are barely even worth talking about. So while usually I would tend to detest, as would most good pilots, a stock player grinding by farming AIs, you see it a lot on Spain for instance in lower tier jets, rather than doing their bit and pulling their weight for their team, by top tier, well, I've already done that. I've taken out another enemy player, the Su-17, which as a stock MiG-21 in this meta I think is an acceptable performance. So what I want to do now by taking out these AIs rather than helping my team against the enemy players is I'm trying to make sure that I am stock for the shortest amount of time possible. I'm not an effective jet anyway, so my team shouldn't treat me as someone who can really adequately support them, since missiles are everything and I don't have any to support them with. And not having flares either, I will die if I don't pick my battles very carefully. It's important to remember that the MiG-21 in today's meta has lost its crown. It's not the jet it used to be, and is no longer the jet which, on the Russian and now the German teams, everyone is looking at to carry the team. That role has been taken over by the MiG-23s and even the MiG-27, which leaves MiG-21 players with a different role to play. Back to the topic of killing AIs. And I think it's also worth mentioning the sort of psychological factor of removing them from the minimap. Of course, they will appear as red dots on your minimap, indistinguishable from enemy players. So if you're dogfighting and you see red dots around you, it's a bit of the situation of the boy who cried wolf, in that you'll either be frantically looking around behind you for the enemy player who's about to kill you, when in reality it's just a few Yak-38s. Or, inevitably, you won't bother looking and get a missile up the tailpipe from something like a Jaguar or A5C. By this point, we have been engaged heavily. We've got Phantoms, MiG-23s, MiG-27s, the whole works coming after us and a couple of other members of my team. So what are we going to do? Well, nothing. Again, we're a stock MiG-21. This isn't on us to deal with. So instead, after defending very, very badly against those enemy jets, we are out. We are headed back to base, followed by a Phantom who is going to pull off eventually. When you're stock at top tier, you don't have any real ability to engage the enemy team in a regular sort of engagement anymore with all these long-range, high-powered missiles. Your job is to get in early and take out those targets of opportunity, the attackers. That window of opportunity closes very, very quickly, but it's almost always there, and if you don't take it, someone else will. But once that window closes, you are actually of more use to your team by getting back to base and coming in fresh with your 2 missiles. And it's about now that I want to talk about stock missiles, because I was one of the main advocates for it not only being a quality of life change for the players who put in so much effort, but wholly necessary for jets to have stock missiles, especially 3rd generation jets where missiles are your primary armament and guns are secondary. This isn't what I meant. I mean, 2 R3S missiles on a top tier jet, not even a full loadout of 4 of the damn things, and having to grind for the R3R? No, this is not acceptable. So rather than just ranting, let's put forward a fix for Gaijin to completely ignore. I think the MiG-21 BIS should have as a stock loadout all of its R3S and R3R missile loads. So 4 R3S, 4 R3Rs without having to grind for a module for them, or 2 of each. That lets you grind for R13Ms, ideally as a tier 1 modification, and you should be going for that first. Flare and chaff dispensers on tier 2, and then your R60s at tier 3 or 4. As a 3rd generation fighter, you have your ability then to rely on missiles as a primary armament, although not a very good one, but is more what you'd expect from a stock aircraft, which at least means that you're not relying on the water pistol of a 23mm as your main weapon for fighting Japanese Phantoms equipped with the radar of an F-16 Viper. But getting back to the match at hand, we are now re-engaging in the MiG-21, and even though our team have entirely crumbled at this point, we are still going to be able to put in some work. Though admittedly, if I'd decided to bail on the match, I would have saved myself one of the 10 free repairs. How these matches tend to go is, in the beginning, the attackers run in, your A7 Corsairs, Jaguars, and of course Su-17s. While the air superiority fighters start to climb, get some speed, get some distance, and start looking for the most important targets. Phantoms at altitude, MiG-23s, Viggens off by themselves. This is when you rush in your stock MiG-21, because the enemy fighters are going to have bigger fish to fry, and the MiG-21 is not an important enough target to get yourself killed over in a Viggen. Then, sort of midway through, you start seeing a lot of fireballs. Now, these are not the clusters you tend to see at lower BRs. No, these are missile fireballs. Very unforgiving, very dangerous, and particularly very three-dimensional, often extending from ground level right up to 4 kilometers altitude and 4 kilometers in all directions. This is not your forte. The MiG-21 in the current meta, because of its lack of energy retention and stock, its lack of any good, capable weapons or really any performance worth writing home about, has stepped into the role of an interceptor, and like the Lightning back when it was added at 10.0, it faces the sort of standard War Thunder interceptor problem. So don't get into it. That is when you get back to base and let your team of top performing jets, which the MiG-21 best no longer is, get to work. And later, what we've got now is a team that are beginning to run out of missiles, run out of energy, and there are too few players left to cause one of those dangerous Thurballs. This is when we come in, and even though we were engaged by the enemy first, we were able to nab a quick kill in a short dogfight with an enemy MiG-21, before inevitably being taken out, the last player left on the team, in a stock MiG-21. So obviously not a match to show off. I mean, 2 kills, 3 AIs and a loss having died. Ain't no PogChamps in chat for that performance. But what I think one of the main takeaways is from this one is, in the MiG-21, because you're not the sort of hammer of your team anymore, you can feel free to rush in, take out those targets of opportunity, including the AIs. And while it might be seen as sort of unacceptable to farm AIs as a cheap way of grinding a MiG-15, by top tier, it's not only acceptable, but almost advisable, especially when you're stuck in a MiG-21, which now that it's finally on the German team, a lot of players are. For me, this was my first time stock grinding a MiG-21 since the MF was added about 2 years ago, and doing what we did in this game, it was a much easier, much less painful experience, in a match which took next to no time or effort whatsoever. Anyway, that's about it from me. Gaijin, please rework stock armaments. Adding in these new loadouts of 2 dogshit missiles did nothing to fix the problem. But aside from that, I hope you have enjoyed this video, hope it gave you some pointers. And now that we've gotten the new PC set up, I will be returning to live streams, which will be here on YouTube. We are officially putting Twitch away. I'm not sure yet what kind of schedule we'll be streaming on. I will of course keep you guys updated, so stay tuned to the next couple of videos for that. So I might catch you live next week, but if not, then I will catch you lads in the skies. Alright, so now we get into some of our active combat terms. We're not going to be talking about fighter maneuvers here, that could be a video all of its own, or 3, but we do cover those kinds of things over on my other channel where we have a whole series of mock dogfight videos you should come check out, link below.